they left. Or maybe they stopped trying. The texts became fewer. The attention grew colder. And somewhere between the silences, you were left wondering, what did I do wrong? But here's a truth not many will tell you. When you stop worrying, when you truly release your grip, you don't just find peace. You become a storm in their sky. This video is not about vengeance. It's about presence, reclaiming yours. It's about the power of detachment, of not needing their attention, their validation, or even their apology. When you master this quiet strength, they notice. Oh, they notice. If you've ever felt abandoned, overlooked, or underestimated, then settle in. We're going to dissect the exact process that turns silence into power and detachment into the most unsettling kind of presence. And if this resonates with where you are right now, if you've been walking that line between hope and hurt, make sure to subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the path that asks for more of you and less of them. Now, let's begin where it hurts most. Chapter 1. The sting of their departure. They say the silence is louder than any goodbye. But what they don't say is how disorienting that silence can be when it first arrives. Especially when it comes from someone you gave pieces of yourself to, your time, your thoughts, your vulnerability. And now, nothing. Just a growing void where once there were late-night texts, playful glances, or whispered dreams exchanged in moments that felt sacred. The sting doesn't come only from their absence. No, it cuts deeper. It's in the way they vanished without ceremony, as if your presence had become optional, replaceable. As if everything you once offered had been quietly placed in storage, behind other newer, shinier distractions. And yet, this pain is important, because pain, especially the pain of abandonment, is a teacher the Stoics knew well. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, but let's not lie to ourselves. When someone walks away without explanation, the imagination becomes a battlefield. Every memory becomes a weapon. You replay what you said, what you didn't. You scan for the moment it all began to fade. You question your worth, thinking maybe if you had just done this one thing differently. But stop, because here is your first step on the path to detachment. Understanding that their departure isn't necessarily about you. In fact, it rarely is. People drift for reasons buried beneath their own confusion, ego, fear, or hunger for novelty. Sometimes they leave because they cannot face your depth. Other times because your calm unsettles the chaos inside them. You must not beg for closure from someone who couldn't even offer continuity. When someone departs, abruptly, slowly, or even cruelly, it is tempting to chase, to explain yourself, to send a long message, to prove your value. But every time you chase someone who has already started walking away, you offer them a kind of power they did not earn and do not know how to hold. Detachment begins the moment you choose not to chase. But let us go deeper. The Stoics never asked us to become numb. They asked us to become resilient. The sting of someone's absence is not something you deny. It is something you walk through, eyes open, spine straight, heart guarded but not closed. Epictetus reminded us that we must distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. Their feelings, their decisions, their silence, all of it lies outside your command. What lies within is how you respond to that absence. Will you collapse inward, chasing ghosts? Or will you begin to build? You see, the sting is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you showed up fully, openly, with sincerity. That is not something to be ashamed of. But now, Now it is time to redirect that openness inward, to stop bleeding for those who never asked how you were healing. And yes, they might pretend not to notice your silence in return, but they do. Even if they don't react, even if they never say it, the human heart is not designed to be completely indifferent to someone who once mattered. Your absence, if grounded in dignity, carries more weight than any desperate words. Do not be fooled by their performance. If they suddenly seem happier, louder, more visible, it's not always because they are thriving. Often, it is because they are compensating. They feel the shift, the withdrawal of your energy, and it unsettles them. But ego will never admit that directly. Instead, it distracts, it flaunts, it masks. Let them. You're not here to interrupt their process. You're here to initiate yours. Because detachment, true detachment, is not about pretending not to care. It is about caring more about your own peace than their presence. You must understand this. There is power in being unbothered. Not numb, not bitter, unbothered. That is a state that unnerves those who are used to seeing you shaken. It is the silence of someone who has recentered, rebalanced, and remembered who they were before the chaos began. And if you truly walk this path, you will start to see the sting transform. From sharpness to clarity. From ache to instruction. From loss to liberation. So ask yourself, right now, what has their departure taught you that their presence never could? And if you've ever walked through that kind of disappearance, when someone left you confused, questioning and aching, I want you to share what helped you reclaim your ground. Drop it in the comments. You never know who's scrolling through, silently hurting, and might find healing in your words. Now that we've faced the sting, it's time to understand why they drift and how to shift the entire dynamic. Chapter 2: Why they drift and how to shift it. It often begins subtly. A delayed response here, a vague answer there. The little signals, easily ignored if you're hopeful, but loud if you're honest. And that's the thing, isn't it? We often choose hope over honesty in the early stages of their drift. We cling to excuses. Maybe they're just busy. Maybe they didn't sleep well. Maybe nothing. Because more often than not, they are drifting not because of you, but because of them. You need to understand this. Emotional distance is rarely the result of a single moment. It's a slow erosion, a subtle pulling away that feels invisible, until one day you look up and they're no longer where they used to be. Their words lack weight. Their eyes don't search for you like they used to. Their presence becomes more of a placeholder than a connection. So why do they drift? Some drift because they are overwhelmed by life, by emotions they never learned to handle, by expectations they didn't agree to but silently resent. Others drift because they've tasted comfort and now crave chaos again. For some, love is too soft a language. They only understand what hurts. And some drift because they have what they think they want. Your presence, your commitment, your energy, and they no longer feel the need to earn it. Comfort breeds neglect when appreciation fades. But here's the part most never tell you. Their drift is not the end of the story. It's your beginning. You see, when you notice the shift, you have a choice. You can chase them, which is what most do. Over-explain, over-give, overstay. Or you can shift the energy. Not through a speech, not through an ultimatum, but through stillness. The Stoic shift begins with inwardness. You stop asking what they're thinking. You start asking what you're becoming. You don't fill their silence. You fill your own space. You don't try to decode their detachment. You refine your direction. Think about this. Every time they drift and you lean in, you train them. You teach them that your presence will always outweigh their inconsistency. That no matter how far they pull back, you'll pull forward. That is not strength. That is sacrifice, and not the noble kind. But when you match their silence with stillness, that's when the power starts to return. The Stoics taught that nature abhors imbalance, that everything seeks harmony. When someone pulls back and you stay centered, not reactive, not cold, just calm, they feel it, not always consciously. But something inside them shifts. The pattern they relied on is no longer intact. And in that shift, they are forced to confront something unfamiliar, your self-respect. This is where detachment shines. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop controlling. You stop trying to make them feel something. You stop treating their drift like a riddle you must solve. You're not an emotional investigator. You're a builder. Build your life, your world, your days, with or without them. That is how you shift the energy, by becoming the gravitational force again. Because here's a truth the drifting never expect. That you might stop waiting. That you might find peace in their absence. That you might rebuild your kingdom while they wander the wastelands of indecision. And one day, they will look up and realize you are no longer there. Not out of bitterness, not out of punishment, but because you stopped living in their shadow. The Stoic shift is not loud. It doesn't demand an explanation. It just begins, quietly, daily, and deliberately. You start walking back toward yourself. And that walk, it is magnetic. If you've ever felt someone drifting from you and managed to stay grounded instead of reactive, share what helped you stay in your power. Someone else might need your words right now. Now that we understand the drift, it's time to talk about the most underrated response of all. The quiet withdrawal that shakes them to their core. Chapter 3. The power of quiet withdrawal. Most people assume that power is loud, that to reclaim your worth, you must declare it. That to prove your value, you must defend it. That to make someone feel your absence, you must announce your exit. But the truth is far more potent. Power, real power, moves in silence. Quiet withdrawal is not a tactic. It's not passive aggression. It's not a strategy to punish or provoke. It is the sacred act of no longer offering your presence where it is not honored. And when done from a place of calm strength, not pain, not manipulation, it is unsettling, deeply unsettling, because we live in a world addicted to reaction. When you don't react, you confuse them. You shift the entire rhythm of the dance they thought they were leading. Imagine this. They begin to withdraw. You notice. You do not beg. You do not push. You do not flood their inbox with paragraphs or plead for clarity. Instead, you begin to recenter. You respond less. Not to play games, but because your attention is no longer scattered. You start spending more time in your world, not theirs. You remember who you were before you twisted yourself to match their tempo. And here's what happens. Your silence becomes a mirror. In that silence, they are left with their own thoughts, their own patterns, their own conscience. And for someone who is used to being chased, worshipped, or soothed, This mirror is blinding. You have not attacked them. You have not insulted them. You have simply withdrawn, and that absence is deafening. The Stoics were masters of restraint. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice." Translation: you do not need to stoop, to explain, or to retaliate. You simply rise inwardly. Quiet withdrawal is dignified. It is graceful. It says, "I saw your shift. I felt the coldness. And instead of begging for the warmth to return, I built my own fire." It's not about cutting someone off abruptly. It's not even about leaving. It's about stepping back from emotional dependence. You may still talk. You may still see them. But inside, your compass has shifted. Their validation is no longer your North Star. You no longer wait for their message to feel seen. You no longer adjust your light to suit their shade. And that shift, it shakes the ground. People feel when your energy no longer moves toward them. They feel when your presence no longer orbits theirs. They feel the vacuum, the echo. And often, that is when they reach out again. Not always with love, but with curiosity. With confusion, with fear that they've lost something they once took for granted. But by then, you are not the same. You see, quiet withdrawal changes you. It teaches you to sit with your own discomfort, to tend to your own ache, to find joy again in solitude. That is where the true growth happens. Not in their apology, but in your re-emergence. You will start to notice new things. How peaceful your thoughts become without constant analysis of their behavior. How much more space you have to create, to breathe, to simply be. You start filling the silence, not with longing, but with purpose. And yes, there may be moments where the silence aches. You may wonder if you did the right thing. That's normal. But remind yourself, you are not withdrawing out of punishment. You are withdrawing out of protection. You are preserving your energy, your essence, your dignity. There is a strength in that which no chaos can match. So if you're in a place where you've begun the quiet withdrawal, or feel that you need to, write this in the comments as a reminder to yourself and others. My silence is my power, and mean it. Now, as the silence deepens, something else begins to stir. The moment when they start to notice and the real shift begins. Chapter 4. When they start to notice. It always happens later than you expect. Sometimes weeks, sometimes longer. But it happened the moment when they start to notice. At first, they won't admit it. Maybe not even to themselves. But something begins to shift in their world. Subtly, at the edge of their awareness, they begin to feel it. The absence of your energy. The stillness where once there was pursuit. The space where your validation used to live. Now echoing with quiet. They may not call it regret. They may not even think of it as missing you. But make no mistake, they feel the change. And that's where your strength becomes visible. Because now, you're no longer reacting. You're no longer in their orbit. You've returned to your center. And it is that gravitational shift that unsettles them. Because here's a truth people rarely speak aloud. Most are not afraid of losing you. They are afraid of losing the version of themselves they could be with you. The one who was wanted, needed, admired. When your attention leaves, it's not just you that disappears. It's who they got to be in your presence. That realization is sharp, and it creeps in during quiet moments. They might not text you at first. They might not call, but you'll notice it in smaller ways. A story view, a subtle like, a mutual friend telling you they asked about you. It's not random, it's reconnaissance. They are checking to see if the door is still open. And the paradox is this: they only begin to truly value you once you've stopped needing them to. This is the moment many falter. When the phone buzzes again, when the warmth returns, when they test the waters. And it's tempting, so tempting to believe it means everything has changed. That their noticing is a sign of realization. That the silence has been broken by growth. But slow down, because not every hand reaching back is reaching for your heart. Some are reaching for comfort. Some are reaching to see if they still can. And some are simply reacting to the silence, not the lesson it carried. The Stoics would urge caution here. They would say, observe, do not assume. Let their actions speak louder than your hopes. Let time reveal intent. When they start to notice, they may come closer. But your test is to stay still. Not cold, not closed, but still. Because you are not the same person they walked away from. You've shifted. You've grown. You've built something in their absence, and it is sacred. Let them enter your new world if they wish. But let them earn it with consistency, with sincerity, with changed behavior, not just changed tone. This is not about playing hard to get. It's about refusing to be easy to forget. And yes, there will be those who pretend not to notice your detachment, who wear indifference like armor, who lean further into their distractions to avoid feeling your absence. But even then, something in them notices. It always does. Because we are wired to sense imbalance. And when someone who used to orbit us begins to shine on their own, we feel it. Even if we never say a word, this is your time to remain rooted, to continue pouring into the life you've been building. Not to prove a point, but because it feels good. Because your peace is finally louder than your longing. And maybe, just maybe, they will come back with new eyes. Eyes that see your worth without needing to lose it again. Or maybe they won't, but that is not your concern anymore. If you've ever experienced this, the subtle shift when someone who drifted away suddenly starts circling back, share how you handled it. What gave you clarity? What reminded you not to fall into old patterns? Because the next step is when they test you. Chapter 5, their test and your response. It doesn't always come with warning. Sometimes it's wrapped in kindness. Sometimes it looks like confusion. But make no mistake, when they come back around, they will test you. It's rarely intentional. Few people are aware enough to admit they're testing boundaries. But on a deep, instinctive level, they want to know one thing. Are you still there? Not just physically, not just digitally, but emotionally, spiritually. Do you still need them? Crave them? Can they still stir you? And that's where your real test begins. Because if you've done the work, if you've truly detached, centered, grown, then you'll notice the test before you fall into it. It might be subtle, a vague message, heavy on nostalgia, a question they already know the answer to, a casual "hey, just checking in," or even a compliment disguised as curiosity. But here's what they're really asking. Do I still live in you? And your job as someone walking the Stoic path is not to respond with vengeance, not with arrogance, but with clarity. You see, when someone tests your boundaries, it's because you've set them. When someone pokes at your silence, it's because they've noticed its strength. When someone tries to reopen a door they once closed, they are not just remembering you, they are remembering what they lost when they let you go. This is not the time to collapse into old habits. You do not owe them softness just because they returned with sweetness. You do not owe them space just because they missed you. You owe yourself consistency. The Stoics taught that self-mastery is not just about enduring difficulty. It's about maintaining integrity when your desires are reignited. And that is the real test, not their return, but your response. Because when someone who once withdrew suddenly returns with attention, you must ask yourself, are they reaching for you or for the version of you that accepted breadcrumbs? That version is gone. Your response must reflect that. Calm, grounded, gracious even, but unwavering. You don't need to punish them. You don't need to ignore them. But you must not revert. Quiet strength is your anchor here. Respond when you wish, but from clarity, not craving. If they invite you into conversation, walk slowly. Watch what they say when you don't chase, when you don't leap, when you don't fill the space with emotion. Let them show you if they've grown. Let time do the talking. Let consistency prove their claim. And perhaps you will find that their return carries weight. That their absence taught them something. That they are no longer testing your boundaries, but respecting them. Or perhaps you will see that their return is hollow. That they are only here because they felt your absence, not because they value your presence. And that's fine too, because you no longer need their return to feel whole. You are not auditioning. You are not waiting. You are not trying to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself. This is the freedom detachment gives. Not to reject others, but to no longer bend for them. Not to harden your heart, but to protect its rhythm. So when they test you, smile. Not with smugness, but with knowing. You have grown, and no one, not even the ones who left, get to pull you back into a version of yourself you worked so hard to outgrow. If you've experienced this, a return, a test, a moment where you had to decide between old comfort and new strength, I invite you to share it below. Your experience might help someone else recognize their own moment of choice. Next, we face one of the hardest decisions on the Stoic path, the bold, beautiful move of letting go. Chapter 6, the bold move of letting go. Letting go. Two words that sound deceptively simple, but in practice they can feel like dismembering the very core of who you are, the version of you that held on, that waited, that hoped, and yet, there comes a moment when holding on becomes far heavier than release. When silence stretches too long. When mixed signals rot into emotional confusion. When waiting for clarity becomes its own form of self-neglect. That's when the boldest move becomes the quietest one. Letting go without a scene, without a speech, and without a single look back. To the untrained eye, letting go might look like giving up. But those who know, those who have carried the weight of unreciprocated affection, inconsistent effort, or emotional ambiguity, they understand that letting go is not weakness. It is a form of unseen strength, a sacred exit. When you let go, not out of anger but out of acceptance, you step into a higher form of dignity. You're no longer tethered to outcomes. You're no longer checking your phone with a heart in your throat. You're no longer mentally negotiating your self-worth in someone else's behavior. And yes, it hurts. Because you are not simply walking away from a person. You are walking away from the story you built around them. The potential. The future. The version of life that could have been. If only they had chosen you with the same clarity you chose them. But here's the thing. You cannot build a stable house on shifting sand. And no matter how beautiful the idea of someone may be, if their presence keeps you unstable, anxious, uncertain, then the idea must die, so that your peace can be born. The Stoics were never about denial. They were about realism. They did not ask us to suppress pain. They asked us to see it clearly, so that we could stop being slaves to it. Letting go is a declaration. It says, I have seen all I need to see. I have waited long enough. I have given more chances than were earned. I have handed out grace until it became an open wound. And now, I choose myself, not in bitterness, but in mercy. You will be tempted to linger, to wait one more day, to hope for one last message that brings closure. But true closure doesn't come from them. It comes from the moment you stop needing anything more to know that you are done. Some people think letting go requires a final conversation, a dramatic goodbye. But often, the most powerful goodbyes are the ones that are never spoken. They happen silently, in the shift of your soul, in the return of your sleep, in the day you forget to think about them, and don't even notice until the evening. This is not about erasing them from memory. You may still think of them. You may still dream about them. But the difference is this: they no longer have a seat at the table of your self-worth. Their opinion no longer shapes your value. Their inconsistency no longer dictates your mood. You begin to live again. You rediscover forgotten parts of yourself. The music you once loved, the books you put aside, the friendships you neglected while you waited. You reclaim your energy. Not all at once, but gradually, day by day, breath by breath, and slowly, the ache becomes a whisper, then a shadow, then nothing. Letting go is not a rejection of them. It is an embrace of you. Do not let your ego confuse this with losing. You are not losing them. You are liberating yourself from a cycle that never fed you, from a narrative that always left you second-guessing. There is a boldness in walking away with grace, in choosing stillness over struggle, in allowing them to live with the echo of your absence, while you fill your life with things that matter. Let them think what they will. Let them misread your silence. Let them call it cold. You owe no explanation for outgrowing the pain you once tolerated. The day you let go is the day your real life begins again. And if you've reached that point, that terrifying, courageous moment of finally releasing someone you held close, I invite you to write one sentence in the comments, a testament to yourself and anyone else silently fighting this same battle. I chose peace over potential. Now, once the hand is released, the heart tested, and the path reclaimed, there remains one final layer: the art of staying unshaken in the storms to come. Chapter 7: The Stoic Way to Stay Unshaken. There is a kind of strength that doesn't roar. It doesn't flex, doesn't boast, doesn't need to be noticed. It is the strength of a mountain during a storm, unmoved, unshaken, quietly enduring. That is the strength we turn to now, because even after you let go, even after the bold decision to walk away, there will still be tremors. Moments when the past whispers again. Days when the silence feels heavier than peace. Mornings when you wonder if they're thinking of you. Nights when the absence crawls back under your skin like a ghost with perfect timing. That's why detachment isn't a one-time act. It's a daily practice. To be stoic is not to be emotionless. That's a common misunderstanding. It's to feel everything and still choose your response. It's to be tempted by the past, by comfort, by the sweetness of familiar illusions, and still choose clarity. And clarity, my friend, is not always kind. Sometimes it's cold. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it asks you to sit with truths that dismantle the stories you clung to. But clarity is what sets you free. The Stoics taught that suffering often comes not from events themselves, but from our interpretations. We suffer because we want things to be different, because we expect a certain outcome, because we attach to a specific version of how someone should treat us, or love us, or show up for us. And when they don't, we spiral. But what if you stopped expecting? What if instead of hoping for consistency from someone who's only ever been unpredictable, you simply accepted them as they are and adjusted accordingly? What if instead of measuring your worth by how others respond to you, you began to root your identity in something untouchable? That is the Stoic way. To become unshaken, you must anchor your peace in things no one can take from you. Not beauty, not status, not the warmth of another's attention, but in your principles, in your values, in the quiet confidence that you are enough, not because someone stays, but because you stayed with yourself. You begin to realize they were never the source of your joy. At best, they amplified it. At worst, they distracted you from cultivating it on your own. And now that they're gone, now that the dust has settled, you see the opportunity in the wreckage, the space, the silence, the power. You no longer wake up with your worth pending their approval. You no longer perform, bend, twist to keep their gaze. You've moved past the need to be understood by someone who never made the effort to understand you. This is the art of being unshaken. Not that the waves stop, but that you stop fearing them. Of course, the world around you will still provoke. You'll see their posts, their new attachments, their curated smiles. You'll hear mutual friends mention them offhandedly. You'll be tempted to compare, to question, to revisit the narrative. But don't. When your center is internal, no external image can destabilize it. They might appear to move on faster. They might seem unbothered. But understand, appearances are not the measure. Reaction time is not the same as healing. And distraction is not growth. Your journey is quieter, but more real. It happens in the hours you spend alone, relearning yourself. In the mornings you rise without needing their message to shape your mood. In the nights you sit with your thoughts and don't run from them. In the tiny moments when you choose not to reach out, not to reopen, not to beg the past to return. Every day you do this, you strengthen a muscle most never train. Inner stability, and that stability, it radiates. People feel it, even if they don't understand it, even if they can't name it. Your energy shifts. You no longer chase what dims you. You no longer compromise just to avoid discomfort. You become steady, unbothered. Not because you've numbed yourself, but because you've met the storm, lived through it, and found yourself still standing. That's what Stoicism offers. Not immunity from emotion, but mastery of it. Not a cold heart, but a clear one. You can still feel. You will still love. But you'll do it differently now, from a place of choice, not need, from abundance, not fear. You'll give without losing yourself. You'll detach without disconnecting from your values. And the people who enter your life from this place, they'll be different too, because strength recognizes strength. Peace attracts peace attracts peace. And when you live from your center, You no longer appeal to chaos. So let the storms come. Let the past knock at your door. Let the silence linger. Let them wonder. Let the world spin. You are still. You are not waiting for closure. You are the closure. You are not hoping they'll see your worth. You live your worth. You are not shaken by attention or absence, by approval or rejection. You've come home to yourself, and that is a place no one can evict you from. If you've reached this point, this inner shift, where you no longer crumble in the face of old patterns, share your reflection in the comments. What helped you stay centered? What truth brought you back to yourself? Because what comes next is not about them at all. It's about what happens when you thrive, when you grow so visibly, so powerfully, that their silence turns into wonder and their regret becomes inevitable. Chapter 8. They regret as you thrive. There is a particular kind of silence that echoes louder than any words. It is the silence that comes from someone who thought you'd always be there, finally realizing you are not. At first they may have believed it was temporary, that your distance was a tactic, that your stillness was a storm waiting to explode. But when the days pass and you remain grounded, calm, composed, focused on yourself, something clicks. And then the regret sets in, not always instantly. Sometimes it waits until your glow returns, until the weight they left behind has transformed into strength. They'll see it in the way you carry yourself now, no longer waiting, no longer watching, no longer adjusting your worth by their presence. This is the moment when detachment reveals its hidden power. Because while they once saw your care as constant, perhaps even convenient, they now see what your absence truly meant, that your presence was never owed. It was a gift, one they mishandled, one they now remember and wish they had treated differently. But by the time regret finds them, you have already evolved. This is the quiet revenge the Stoics would approve of. Not vengeance, not bitterness, but progress. Not to make them hurt, but to grow so completely that their memory becomes a ghost you nod at in passing, not a phantom that haunts your nights. You begin to thrive, not performatively, not to prove a point, but because peace, once tasted, is addictive. You start saying yes to things you used to postpone. You explore new ideas. You work out not to look good for them, but to feel good for you. You smile more, laugh freely. There is lightness in you now, a freedom that wasn't possible when your mind was preoccupied with someone who couldn't choose you clearly. And somehow, as if pulled by gravity, they begin to notice. Maybe it's a message out of nowhere. Maybe it's a sudden like on a picture from long ago. Maybe they hover in the digital corners of your life, watching from a distance. Don't be fooled by the casual tone. It's not casual. It's calculated. It's cautious, because they can feel the shift in your energy, and they're not sure if they still have access to it. They don't, because you've changed. And not in a temporary performative way, but fundamentally. You're not the same person who stayed up at night wondering what you did wrong. You're not the same soul who needed their validation like air. You're not waiting for closure, for apologies, or even for explanations. You are building, and that building makes noise. People around you start to notice too. You attract differently now, with your calm, with your presence, with your standards. You don't flinch at red flags. You don't fall for potential. You've learned to read energy. You've learned to hold space for yourself. That's what thriving looks like after detachment. Not just surviving, but redefining who you are without them. And their regret? It's not your responsibility to soothe. You don't have to explain your healing. You don't have to entertain their return. You can wish them peace and still keep walking. Because this journey is no longer about being chosen. It's about choosing yourself again and again and again. There is a kind of power that comes from walking through the fire and emerging, not unburned, but refined. You carry scars, yes, but you carry wisdom too. You no longer chase, you no longer beg, you no longer fold under the pressure to be what they needed. You simply are, and that self, that healed, steady, radiant self, is more magnetic than anything you ever tried to perform. Let their regret stay with them. Let it teach them. But never let it pull you back into a version of life where your needs were ignored, your efforts were one-sided, and your love was undervalued. You do not owe access to anyone just because they finally realized your worth. Real growth honors the present, not the past. And if you've reached this point, if you've risen, thrived, transformed while they remain still, I want you to write this in the comments. I didn't move on to hurt you. I moved on to save myself. Now, it's time to close the chapter, not just on them, but on the version of yourself who lived for their attention. Conclusion. So here you are, not at the end, but at the beginning of something far more important. You've walked through every stage. You felt the sting of their distance. You resisted the urge to chase. You leaned into the discomfort of silence. You made the bold decision to let go. You faced the test of their return, stood tall in your new strength, and began to build a life that wasn't centered around being wanted, but around being whole. And now, you're not worried anymore, because you understand that when you stop grasping for people who were never ready for your depth, you create space for something real, not just in love, but in every corner of your life. Peace, clarity, direction, purpose. They may still wonder what happened. They may still circle, but that is no longer your concern. You are not theirs to figure out. You are not an unfinished story waiting for their rewrite. You are complete, in motion, in evolution. And if this journey spoke to you, if it stirred something real in your chest, something tired of waiting, something hungry for freedom, then join us here. Subscribe not just to this channel, but to the path we're walking together. One of calm power, one of emotional mastery, one of building a life that no departure can destroy. And before you go, I'd love to know, what was the turning point for you? Was it a silence that stretched too long? A final message that never came? A realization that you were shrinking to fit inside their indifference? Drop your moment below. Let someone else see that they're not alone in this. Your story could be the light in someone's darkest chapter. And if you've made it this far, it means you're ready. Not for revenge, not for recognition, but for peace. So go live, fully, deeply, fearlessly, and let them wonder.